What if you could release a trauma you've carried for 10, 20, or even 50 years in a single moment? Not because you finally learned how to live with it, and not because you've spent years processing, healing, denying, or suppressing it, convincing yourself that it didn't matter, but because you suddenly understand that the trauma you're experiencing today is not actually coming from your past. It's being recreated in the present. And if it's being created in the present, it can also be released in the present. We've been taught that when something deeply traumatic happens to us, it becomes a part of who we are. We carry it forward through time, and healing becomes a process of somehow trying to undo the damage that was done. But that entire understanding changes when we step outside the perspective of this physical life and look at what is actually happening from the greater perspective of consciousness. In this video, I'm going to take you through 3 powerful steps that completely change the way you understand trauma and how it can be released instantly. We're going to look at the themes you chose to explore before entering this physical life and why certain experiences become part of that exploration. We'll understand what's actually happening on a higher level when another person becomes part of those experiences. And finally, we'll explore the illusion of linear time itself, because the person who experienced that trauma in your past is not the person you are right now. The only thing keeping that trauma alive is the continuity you continue to create between who you were then and who you choose to be now. The first thing to understand is that you didn't enter this life as a blank slate. Before you ever focused yourself in this physical experience, you chose certain themes you wanted to explore. Those themes became part of the blueprint for this life and the personality you created, the circumstances you were born into, and many of the challenges you would encounter were structured in ways that would give you opportunities to explore and learn from those themes. Together, this forms what we call the destiny you chose for yourself. Now, this doesn't mean that before you were born, you sat down and planned every painful event that would ever happen to you. You chose the overall theme, but there are countless ways that theme can be explored. The theme is something you explore, but the ways you choose to experience that theme can be infinite. This is where free will comes into play. So imagine that one of those themes you chose for this life was self-empowerment. You may create circumstances that give you the experience of powerlessness, because you now have something against which to discover what being empowered actually means. If your theme involves self-worth, you may find yourself in circumstances where your worth appears to be challenged. If your theme involves learning to trust yourself, you may encounter experiences that continually place you in situations where you have to decide whether you're going to give your power to someone else or trust what you know within yourself. The challenge isn't there because you're being punished. It gives you the contrast that allows you to experience powerlessness, so you can discover your own power, experience a lack of worth, so you can discover your own value, or experience fear so that you can learn that fear doesn't have to control you. And this begins to change the perspective of trauma completely. Instead of looking at a painful experience only from the perspective of what happened, you can begin to look at it from the larger perspective of the consciousness that chose to have this physical life in the first place. The question changes from, why did this happen to me? To, how does this experience relate to what I came here to explore? But the experience itself is not the theme. Challenging experiences and circumstances are the way the theme becomes visible. And that distinction matters because the painful experience was never what you came here to hold on to. It was an experience that gave you an opportunity to explore the larger theme behind it. Once you begin to see the experience from that larger perspective, you can stop asking why life did this to you and recognize it as an experience that provides growth. The second step is to understand what happens when another person is directly involved in a traumatic experience. A natural disaster or serious accident may involve circumstances beyond anyone's control, but trauma can also come through the choices and actions of another person. And when another person is involved, there's another layer to the experience that we need to understand. From the physical perspective, we see two separate people. One person does something and another person experiences the consequences. And at this level, each person is absolutely responsible for the choices they make. But the physical personality is only one level of who we are. At a higher level of consciousness, experiences involving other people become co-creations. We come together when our individual paths and themes create an opportunity for an experience that can serve both people in some way. Even though what each person is exploring through that experience may be completely different. This does not mean that you sat down before you were born and agreed that a specific person would hurt you in a specific way. Remember, the theme is the blueprint, and there are infinite experiences that can be created to explore that theme. This becomes especially important when we're talking about extreme experiences, such as childhood abuse or sexual violence. Choosing a theme never means that a child wants to be abused or that someone wanted to be assaulted in order to grow. You chose the theme you wanted to explore, but you cannot control every aspect of how it plays out, including the choices another person makes in their interaction with you. They bring their own themes, beliefs, and free will into the experience, and what they choose to do is their responsibility. But whatever form the experience takes can still become part of your exploration. An experience of powerlessness, for example, can ultimately lead you to discover your own power, becoming a really powerful catalyst for transformation. The other person remains responsible for what they chose to do, but you are the one who decides what that experience becomes for you and how it transforms you. And so, when two or more people come together in an experience, there's much more happening than we can see from the limited perspective of physical reality. Our higher mind has a much broader perspective of how our journey and how each experience can serve our life theme. Think about how much this changes the perspective of a traumatic experience. At the physical level, you may see yourself only as the person something happened to, a victim. But from the larger perspective, you were never simply a powerless participant in someone else's story. Your higher consciousness was also involved in bringing together the circumstances through which your own theme could be explored. The other person may have been exploring something entirely different through the same experience, but your paths intersected because the experience held relevance for both of you. Taking responsibility for your part in the co-creation doesn't mean taking responsibility for another person's actions. nor does it excuse what they did. It means reclaiming your own power by recognizing that you are not simply a victim of someone else's choices. You can hold them responsible for what they choose to do without allowing their choice to define who you become because of it. They have their own path, just as you have yours. This moves you from victimhood to self-empowerment. The third step requires us to understand something about the nature of time itself. Outside of physical reality in this dimension, time is not linear. From the perspective of the higher mind, everything is simply known and experienced in an instant. But here in space-time, we create the experience of one moment following another so that life can unfold as a continuous physical experience rather than an instantaneous one. And part of that is the sense that the person you were 10 or 20 years ago is the same person you are today. But you are actually a new version of yourself in every moment. Every change in your beliefs and every choice you make creates a different version of you than the person you were in the moment before. We create a sense of continuity between who we were last week, last year, or 20 years ago, and who we are right now, so that we experience it as one continuous life. And this is where trauma becomes very interesting, because that continuity is something you can choose to maintain or not. When you remember something that happened 20 years ago, you're experiencing a memory right now. The event isn't traveling through time from the past and happening to you again. What you're recreating in this moment is the meaning and beliefs you still associate with it. I'm unsafe. I'm powerless. I'm unworthy. I can't trust anyone. This damaged me. This is part of who I am. Those beliefs maintain the connection between the person who experienced the trauma then and who you are choosing to be now. And sometimes the pattern becomes so familiar that we don't even realize we're the ones continuing it. If you learned through an experience that you were powerless, you can continue treating yourself as powerless long after the person or circumstance that originally gave you that experience are gone. You were taught a pattern, and now you're choosing to perpetuate that pattern yourself because you believe you have to, but you don't. This is where your power to release trauma exists. The experience may be part of your life story, but the beliefs you formed because of it don't have to be part of who you are now. You can give yourself permission to release them. You can recognize that what you came to believe about yourself because of that experience was never a definition of who you actually are. You can acknowledge that the trauma was part of the path that brought you here without continuing to carry the trauma itself. It can become a neutral observation of a past experience rather than something whose emotional energy continues to affect you now. And once you understand that the continuity is being created in this now moment by you, you can also understand that you can choose right now not to create it again. When you bring all three of these together, the entire meaning of trauma begins to change. You came into this life with themes you wanted to explore. Other people may become part of those experiences, bringing their own path and their own choices into the equation. But no experience was ever meant to become a prison you carry with you for the rest of your life. What happened may have shaped you, but it does not have the power to define who you are in this moment unless you continue to give it that power, unless you choose to use your power to feel powerless. My question to the architect: what is the biggest thing that keeps people locked in a past trauma that can be transformed into freedom from that trauma? And here is the sharing. Beloved, the greatest factor that keeps people locked in past trauma is the misidentification of the self with the trauma experience. This misidentification occurs when the individual internalizes the trauma as a core aspect of their identity, leading to a distorted sense of self that is shaped by pain, suffering, and the narratives associated with the trauma. Trauma is an energetic imprint that can alter one's perception of self and reality. When individuals define themselves by their trauma, they create an identification with victimhood, creating a closed loop to continuously re-experience the trauma through their thoughts, emotions, and reactions. Trauma carries a specific energetic frequency that resonates with disempowerment. When individuals identify with this frequency, they become entrained to its resonance, deeply embedding it into every aspect of their life. The first step toward freedom is to shift from being identified as the victim of trauma to becoming the observer of the experience. This involves recognizing that the trauma is an event that occurred, but not a definition of who you are. By disengaging from the narrative of victimhood, this cultivating awareness and non-attachment to the experience occurs. By reframing the narrative surrounding the trauma from "this happened to me" to "this occurred, and now I choose to respond differently," you begin to alter the energetic imprint it holds. Visualize and embody the version of yourself that exists beyond the trauma, aligning thoughts, emotions, and actions with this version, creating a gravitational pull toward that identity. Ritual such as forceful exhalation, burning symbols representative of the trauma, or performing movements that express release also serve as powerful tools for the subconscious to recognize the transition from one state of being to another. This transformation is not about erasing the past. It is about recontextualizing it into a new narrative. The path to freedom lies in the power to redefine oneself in the light of the present moment. Embrace this journey of self-discovery and empowerment, knowing that you have the ability to transcend your past and create a future filled with healing, growth, and resilience. And so, you are not here to remain the person who was hurt, betrayed, abandoned, abused, or made to feel powerless. You are here to discover what you can become through everything you experience. You can keep the wisdom. You can keep the strength. You can acknowledge the path that brought you here without continuing to carry the trauma that was part of it. You don't have to keep recreating the trauma to prove that it mattered. That trauma you continue to recreate is a messenger telling you something needs to be released, to be transformed. You can simply decide that it ends with the person you were instead of continuing with the person you choose to be now. This is self-empowerment. This is self-sovereignty. This is your birthright. And with that, we'll bring this to a close. Thank you so much for joining me in this exploration. Questions or comments are always welcome. I read them all. And I've also left a question in the pinned comment for any insights that you'd like to offer. If this sharing resonates and you'd like to hear more, please hit the like button, which helps me know if you're inspired by my teachings. For more insights, tap the notification bell to be notified when new videos are released. Thank you so much for listening and for being part of this beautiful, growing community where nothing we have lived through can ever be greater than who we are becoming. Superhuman Made Simple with the Architect.